Yo, what's shaking, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football Channel. I'm Jeff Ketchum. That's Anwar Richardson. Do us a favor while we're doing this video. If at any point we say something interesting or funny or whatever, like the video, subscribe to the channel. We would like to get to 12,000 subscribers on the channel as soon as possible. Help us get there. And of course, comment on the video. Anwar, today we're talking about Agiye Hall, Alabama transfer wide receiver who goes into the portal earlier this week and has emerged as a guy that will visit Texas this weekend. It's an interesting story for a lot of different reasons, the least of which isn't the fact that, you know, as far as the numbers game go, we know that the Longhorns have needs and interest in the portal. They haven't been bringing in a lot of guys for visits, which indicates a new level, I think, of sincerity and interest. We know that O'Shawn Mathis is a guy that they're bringing in for a visit last week. And we know that O'Shawn Mathis is a guy that's already visited the campus before. My reaction to Agiye Hall being a guy that they're bringing in for a visit this weekend was simply, oh, okay, so this is real.
Yeah, by the way, O'Shawn Mathis is coming next week. You had said last week, but he's coming next week for the spring game.
Spring game, yes.
Yeah, I mean, there, you know, Catch, we, of course, I had reported several weeks ago, maybe even a month or so ago in one of our war rooms that, you know, wide receiver would be something that this team looked into as from a transfer portal standpoint. And, you know, from the Texas perspective, when they look at it, they look at, okay, they've got Xavier Worthy, and then they've had some question marks after that. Now, they brought in Isaiah Nayor, and that gives you like two guys that check the boxes, but you also had a guy like Jordan Whittington, who, when healthy, has been incredibly productive, was very productive last season. The key is if when healthy. You have Troy Amiri, who's a guy that's, you know, recovering, you know, from, again, a second, knee injury. So then and then you have a lot of other kind of unproven guys that we like. Marcus Washington is a guy that I think is tremendously talented, but you still have some unproven guys. And so what it looks like for them is this bringing in a guy who checks the boxes, one they're familiar with. Jeff Banks recruited Agiye when he was at Alabama, so there's a lot of familiarity with that family and Jeff Banks, and then they'll have a chance to get to know Sarkisian a little bit better this upcoming weekend. But, you know, if you're in Texas and you're Steve Sarkisian, and he's coming from a place, Catch, where they're used to stacking talent, right, Catch? I think that's the one thing I noticed at Texas. You get one or two, and it's like, cool, you're good. And you go to the other programs, they're like, no, we've got like 4 or 5s, you know, deep, you know, of guys. And so he's willing to stack talent, you know, create competition in the room. I like it personally, Catch. I like bringing in that guy. I like bringing in something that we're going to talk a little bit more, but I did some research and asked some people about it. I want to get you some more of your take, but I was able to do some research to call one of my guys down in Florida, because that's where he's from the same area. And I was able to get a little bit more intel about him as well.
I think that, you know, it's interesting. We've been looking, there's a lot of elements, I think, to his recruitment and his story at Alabama. Let's just start with the talent piece of this. From a talent standpoint, it makes total sense. He was a national top 75 type prospect, according to Rivals, when he comes out of high school. You know, it's a profile not too dissimilar from Xavier Worthy in terms of what his recruiting ranking was and kind of, you know, what it looked like from a recruiting standpoint and the number of big time programs that were interested in him coming out of high school. He goes to Alabama. He had not really carved out a role for himself in the hierarchy of that Bama offense as a true freshman, which I think shouldn't shock anybody, right? I mean, it's usually the Xavier Worthys of the world who can come in and set the world on fire from Jump Street are really much more rare than I think a lot of people would give consideration for. So it doesn't surprise me that he's a guy that's 1 year out of high school and hasn't yet, you know, established himself as a frontline player the way a guy like Isaiah Nayor would have done at Wyoming, right? He doesn't have the stats, he doesn't have the profile. And I wonder, we've spent so much time thinking about players at Texas is looking at in the portal from an immediate playing time standpoint. I wonder if he's not one more for the future. Not to say that he's a guy that wouldn't play this year, but if Texas is healthy, and they're operating at an optimal level, their three starting wide receivers this year will be Isaiah Neyor, Xavier Worthy, and Jordan Whittington. Depth is an issue. And I wonder if this isn't, you just said, stacking up guys at the wide receiver position. You can close your eyes and see a world where Isaiah Neyor has one season in Austin and suddenly that need is filled again. Maybe this is a guy that helps supplement a recruiting class that a year ago didn't quite pull the talent at the wide receiver position that they would have liked to. We discussed that a lot during the recruiting process, where one of the reasons why they've made a change at the wide receiver position was it wasn't quite getting it done in recruiting. They bring Brennan Thompson in, who I think is the heir apparent in the slot to Jordan Whittington. I can almost close my eyes and see a 2023 wide receiver unit where Agiye Hall is a starter on the outside, Brennan Thompson is a starter inside, and Xavier Worthy comes back for his last season. You can see where, maybe they're looking for a guy who's first off the bench, maybe a specialty player that plays 20 or 30 snaps a game, and trying to grow and develop that guy into a player for 2023. Because I look at him and I go, I don't know that he's a guy that just shows up and is that dude right away. And I say that primarily because as a talent, he hadn't quite asserted himself like that at Alabama in such a way that would make you think that no matter where he goes, he's an immediate starter. And the elephant in the room that we have to discuss on some level is that this is a young man that had a hard time adjusting to college life. And, without getting too deep into the weeds, he was in Nick Saban's doghouse almost from the moment he showed up on campus. Reports out of Alabama on the rivals side of things suggest that a player captain council, their leadership council, actually voted Agiye Hall off the team. When he makes this next move, he's a guy that I think needs to settle in as a college athlete, and University of Texas as a school isn't easy. Like, I think it's a big move. And I think the coaches have to do a little bit more vetting here. I think what this visit allows them to do is gauge how well he fits in with the Texas locker room. I think if you're a Texas coach, you got to like the fact that when the announcement was made yesterday that there were Texas players who were liking and retweeting social media talking about him coming to Austin. So I think the players seem excited to kind of see what he's about in person. And I think this is a chance where you get a chance to see of how well he fits in with the locker room. And maybe if you're Steve Sarkisian, you go to your own player-led council type thing and ask when it's over with, hey, how did he fit in this weekend with the guys? And if the answer is, oh man, he fit in like family, then I think you feel a lot better about bringing a guy with a little bit of a questionable past. I mean, let's be clear, there's no police record or anything that's attached to this guy. It's not that. It's just a guy who probably had some showing up on time issues. He was vocal on social media about his lack of playing time as a true freshman. I think there's some maturity issues that he'll need to work on wherever he goes. And it'll be interesting to see how Texas approaches bringing in a guy who who has a completely different profile, I think, than Isaiah Neyor did.
So there's a couple of things, when you talk about Bama and him basically not having an impact, you got to almost grade that on a curve because it's Bama. It's like he didn't have an impact on an NFL team right away, right? And so, yes, it's easier to a certain degree for an Xavier Worthy, who I think we, for the most part, say would be successful in any program that he went to. But
he may not have gone to Alabama and had nearly 1,000 yards.
Correct. Like you're coming into Texas and the guys you have to compete against to get on the field aren't Alabama stacked kind of talent, right? So having to wait your turn at Alabama isn't necessarily, a badge of shame by any stretch of imagination. And so,
at all.
no, not at all. It's like, oh, okay. So, you right now you are a 6th-round draft pick, and in 2 years you'll move into that first or second category. So I'll give him a pass on that. I talked to a good friend of mine who lives down in the Tampa Bay area. For those who don't know, I'm from Tampa Bay, went to Lakeland High School. And, a friend of mine who is in the business has followed this guy. And I was like, just give me the background. Like, I wanted to know, ask him the questions. So you talked about, in high school, he did bounce around to a couple of different high schools. He did go to about 3 high schools down in Florida. He lands at a place called Bloomingdale High School, which historically, Catch, is not a good high school for football. It's just one of those like average to below average just about every single year. And he gets there, and all of a sudden they become that team in the Tampa Bay area, and they start smoking with the more established and premier teams in the area. So from a talent standpoint, for him to be able to raise up that program to a level where I think they only like lost maybe 1 or 2 games the entire year, that's including like the playoffs. And it was cooking with grease the entire year. From a talent standpoint, he's got it, right? Yeah. And so there's no question about that. The other thing that my buddy who's very familiar with it, he goes, he's just a guy that he's just a guy that needs love and needs attention, nothing more, nothing less. And, if he goes up to Bama, it is not receiving that. And, how they recruit these kids and how they treat them when they get on campus are 2 different things, right? I mean, you get a lot of love, you get a lot of affection, and then sometimes these kids, they go to that campus thinking like, man, what's going on, coach? And the coach doesn't say anything to him anymore. Like the attitudes kind of shift. And so I think it becomes a thing that what helps Texas in this thing is that he was recruited by Jeff Banks and had a lot of familiarity with Jeff Banks, and they developed a bond enough with him in order to go there. So I think Jeff Banks is a guy that's probably very familiar with him, the family, probably knows exactly what the guy is going to need in order to be successful going forward. I think from a transition standpoint, as far as some of the questions that you had posed, which are fair, I think he'll be okay. I think the other thing too, Catch, when you start talking about the guys in the locker room and does it get along, man, this locker room needs winners, man. Like they need winners and they need dogs. And the unity in the quote unquote locker room and the harmony in the locker room last year produced 5 wins. They need guys coming in here who have an idea of how to win, who has a little bit more dog mentality, who won't take losing lightly, and who are just about that life. And I think he's a guy that can bring all of that to them and maybe bring a little bit of an edge, just a little bit more of an edge. And I'm talking about going over the edge, because to your point, there's no criminal record, so he's not going over the edge, but a little bit more of an edge than we've seen before. I think overall, like you said, they'll see how he fits in. But I think this is a program, Catch, especially from a player standpoint, that's desperate to have guys who have an edge, that have some leadership potential. And if he's a winner, the way he seems to be, I mean, Catch, there's no reason why coming in, if you're telling me right now you have Hall versus Nayor, I don't know. I mean, at that point, we're talking about one guy who was a standout at Wyoming and one guy who was kind of, finding his way at Alabama. If you put Hall in Wyoming, does he have kind of the same stats? Potentially, more than likely. So it could be really interesting. I don't know
that I would say more than likely. I mean, Nayor was playing in a run-based offense and for 2 years put up all conference level numbers. He might, I can't say that a guy who never made more than a couple of catches in any game he's ever played in at this level would definitely or would likely do that. And I got to push back a little bit, just a little bit. And I got to be careful in doing this. And I want to establish this, though. From a talent standpoint, I mean, Texas doesn't have enough good football players with his ceiling. So from a talent standpoint alone, to me, it's a no-brainer. And if somebody wants, and it's funny because I've been having conversations with different subscribers on orangebloods.com, it's funny, in the last 12 hours, I feel like I've talked to about 15 different people from an assortment of backgrounds about him. And there are a lot of people who are like, can he play in the NFL one day? Yeah, like he's got that kind of a ceiling. Bring him on down. I totally get that. However, this is a Texas football program that just this week, all week long, the culture of the program has been a major talking point. And you go back to the Moro Ajomo comments and the way Steve Sarkisian has addressed those, and we think about a team coming off of a 5-7 year and all of the disruption behind the scenes that occurred with players releasing videos, players showing up late for practices and team events, players yelling at coaches, coaches yelling at players. Like, it was a little bit dysfunctional at times behind the scenes in year one under Steve Sarkisian. I don't know Agiye Hall. If he walked into my house right now, I might go, wait a minute, are you Agiye Hall? But I might only think that because it's on my brain. I don't know the kid. So I have to be, I can't personally speak to anything about him and the situation that he had at Alabama. Yet I've been doing this for 25 plus years, and I can probably count on 2 or 3 fingers the number of players that I've ever heard of that were voted off the team by their teammates. His tenure at Alabama did not include legal issues. It did include enough issues that it sounds like the leaders on an Alabama team, it sounds like they wanted him gone. And we ended up in a situation where Nick Saban was asked about him specifically this week. I don't know that I've seen Nick Saban. So he basically said, we gave that guy multiple chances. He didn't use them. And he said, now I don't know where he's going to go.
He also threw Keelan Robinson under the bus as well. I mean, after Keelan transferred. So Keelan
Robinson didn't get voted off the team.
But I'm saying, but as far as when you're talking about a Saban comment, Saban has been known to kind of sit on a guy on the way out.
He was bitter, though, because he wanted to keep Keelan Robinson and didn't like the fact that he lost him. Correct. You know,
Correct, but I'm just saying he's been known to say stuff about guys who have left the program. Like, that's nothing new. Like, yeah, I hear what you're saying.
I've never heard of an Alabama. According to Agiye Hall this week, he didn't even know he'd been removed from the Alabama roster. That itself doesn't completely make sense to me. He's suggesting that he was voted off the team by his players. The team removed him from the official roster, and his reaction this week was, wow, that's catching me by surprise. All I'm saying is I have sirens going off about the Texas football team who is dealing with trying to improve their culture. I'd be lying. I'd just be flat out lying if I said I'm not at least a little bit concerned about a guy whose profile includes those who covered him at Alabama saying, man, it was an absolute mess. He was a mess while he was here, and nobody seems sad to see him go, even though he is a hellacious talent on the field. Again, I understand if Texas takes him. It would be disingenuous to say there's not a little bit of potential conflict that we need to acknowledge in the very beginning of this, that he's a guy that needs to adjust to the college game. He needs to fit in better with his teammates. He needs to not be on social media complaining about things that are happening. Like, he literally did the things at Alabama that Steve Sarkisian talked in front of the media about shouldn't be happening in certain platforms and in certain ways. I just think there's I think he's a guy that would have to be watched very closely to make sure that he is fitting in, that he is doing the things that the expectations are inside the program. Just based off what I heard, I think he's a guy that maybe you take Jordan Whittington and you say, be this kid's big brother and make sure that he makes the adjustment. I don't know that he's a guy that you bring in and you don't give special considerations to, because I think he is a little bit of a reclamation project just based on how things ended in Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say to that, my mom always told me there's three sides to every story: his side, her side, and the truth. And so we got the Alabama side of it. We haven't heard his side of it, and somewhere in the middle of that will be the truth of really what it is. But you've got at that point when you bring in someone like that who maybe wasn't happy clearly wasn't happy at Alabama. They weren't happy with him. You get into a bad relationship, it happens. Like the shit just starts to blow up. It just starts to bubble and come to the surface. That's where you got to trust that you got a coach like a Brendan Marion who says, okay, listen, I had Jordan Addison last year. He won a Biletnikoff. If you trust me and believe in me, this is what you can do. To your point, you've got good guys in that locker room. You got Xavier Worthy, who we believe is a really good guy, upstanding citizen, all those kind of things, great attributes. Jordan Winnington, kind of a senior statesman, within that locker room. You've got good guys who are receivers in that locker room who have an opportunity and chance to talk to them. And catches, there's something to be said. Sometimes when you, like I said, a change of scenery you never know how that can help someone, where you could be bad or and I don't mean like bad acting, but something may be a bad fit in one situation could be better somewhere else. It's like you could date somebody and all of a sudden it never works out with that person. And then you get with someone else and it's perfect. Same person, just a different set of circumstances. This could be the place, from an optimistic standpoint, that Sarkisian can offer to him that makes him happier. The environment, and again, like I get the questions about the culture but in the locker room, at the end of the day, holding on to the precious culture at the end of the day is not going to help them win a Big 12 championship. Having guys who can come in and win and have an impact, like that's ultimately what it's about. Like Charlie Strong had a great culture. Everyone liked each other. They were harmonious. And what did that produce? So I would just say, at the end of the day, as long as this team is winning, few people are going to care about some of the little things that happen behind the scenes. Like at the end of the day, I think Sarkisian understands this is a bottom line business, and the bottom line is you got to get W's, right? It's not about Good Samaritan awards. It's about getting W's. And if he's a guy that can come in and bring W's, and they just got to figure out how to rein in that lion, so he just attacks on the field and the practice field and nothing else. Who's to say it can't be successful?
So you seem to be in the frame of mind, go full speed ahead, do your own vetting, but barring something completely unforeseen, if the kid can play and he hasn't murdered anybody. Right. Like, again, I think it's really important.
Who are think of good teams, right? Think of some historically great teams. Let's go back to the University of Miami, right? When in their heyday, Sapp and all those guys, they weren't known for being the nicest guys. Now they weren't winning, any choir boy awards. Think of like Urban Meyer when he was at Florida or even Ohio State. They had some guys that ruffled some feathers. Like that does happen.
But even those dudes weren't getting voted off the team.
I mean, but I'm saying I get it. Though Sapp didn't get voted off the team. A lot of guys didn't get voted off the team. But I'm saying sometimes you have to have some guys with just a little bit of edge to you. That's all. And it didn't work in Alabama. You know what? It doesn't work at Alabama because everybody there is an established 4-star, 5-star. And we tell you, coach, it's all established. You either do it this way or not. Here, there's probably a little bit more wiggle room for him to be himself as an individual. And, but am I worried that he's going to somehow be disruptive? I'm not going to stand on the table and say that, but I'm saying if he's provided the tools in the environment that, Sarkisian could provide, Jeff Banks can provide, and the locker room can provide, then I think he fits in,
I'm a little bit like you. I'm not standing on the table on either side of this. I totally get getting the kid who's super talented, and on the surface, absolutely. And I don't even know that my hesitation is completely with him as much as this locker room is still the Humpty Dumpty of college football. It's still getting put back together again. And senior leaders talking about young players not listening and not completely getting it, and wanting to go on 6th Street and be distracted by things that aren't football focused, to bring in a guy who sounds like exactly the guy that Mauro Ajomo just described, right? I mean, I think if you were to talk to the guys at Alabama, they would say he's a guy that wouldn't listen to older guys. He was a guy that wasn't completely focused on football, could get distracted. I don't know.
But you know what's going to change the culture here, Catch? Can I tell you what's going to change the culture?
Tell me.
Winning. That's what's going to change the culture. All this other stuff, all this
kumbaya
stuff is not.
It's a chicken and egg thing, though, because I think you can win 7 or 8 games and have bad culture. I mean, that's like the Mendoza line of college football. And look, Texas hit below that a year ago, but a lot of that is Texas had really bad luck in 50-50 games a year ago. They basically lost all of them. They're 50-50 games for a reason, because you should probably win 50% of them and you should lose 50% of them. And if a few bounces go the right way, we're really talking about a 7-5 type of team more than we're talking about 5. You are what your record says you are. But, if there's a mathematical anomaly attached to your condition, I think you have to at least acknowledge it a little bit. It's one of the reasons why we think this team is good. I haven't heard anybody say, I think 5 and 7 is on the table again this year. I think everybody feels like there will be a natural bounce back. It's about taking the biggest step. And I think back to the greatest Texas football teams that I've ever watched. They all had guys with some questionable backgrounds, maybe some questionable just personality pieces of them. But the thing about those teams that made that work was that they had tremendous leadership. So you have a few guys that maybe Ramon Taylor's the most famous guy. I mean, you're talking about a guy that was one of the most talented offensive players on the 2004 and 2005 teams that won Rose Bowls, and one wins a national championship, but doesn't make it through his entire collegiate career, in part because he got caught with a bunch of weed in the back of his car. And like it just kind of, he wasn't able to make it through all of his years of eligibility. But when Vince Young was there, when the leadership behind those championship teams were there, you could keep a guy like that completely in tune with the rest of the team. When all of that leadership from the 2005 team went to the NFL, it wasn't a huge surprise to anybody in the program that the very next year that Ramon Taylor had a hard time staying in the program. I think my concern is less with Agiye Hall, and it's more with the fact that we know this is a Texas football team that's searching for that next level leadership that, is truly alpha guys controlling themselves, not letting guys do the things that happened a year ago with Joshua Moore. I mean, that situation, from the missing practices or being late to practices to the yelling at Steve Sarkisian, that wasn't fixed and settled by the players, always rubbed me a little bit the wrong way. Who are the guys in this locker room demanding that guys do the right thing? It may exist now in 2022, and I don't know, but I can't certifiably say that it does exist. And it's the one thing that gives me pause about this. I just don't know that Texas has the player infrastructure in place. I think, Jeff Banks may do all the right things with this kid. I think Steve Sarkisian may do all of the right things with this kid. Just don't know that the player infrastructure is in place to help guide him along and be a plus.
Well, Alabama couldn't guide him along. So, I mean.
And we know that culture is not a problem for them.
So, I mean, I just think this is how the sausage is made. Okay? And, at the end of the day, it can't, sometimes you just can't have it both ways. Sometimes you can't have every guy who is, a 1,500-yard receiver that has a 4.0 GPA and holds prayer meetings. Like sometimes
they don't all go to Stanford.
No, sometimes you're going to have to give and take on a little bit. And sometimes in those cases, we have to have a little bit of understanding, because at the end of the day, again, to hold on to the whole culture thing, Texas fans want to win. And Texas fans Texas fans won't give a damn if it's last Boy Scout going on out there, if at the end of the day during the Big 12 championship, okay? So I mean, it's just about that.
And I think you're right. Again, it'll just be the last thing I say about it. The kid's so talented. I mean, there's a reason why he was at Alabama in the first place. The reason why he was a national top 75 prospect. I totally get it. I don't have a stand on the table sentiment here. I just have a little bit of a shrug. I mean, if you go for it, I know why you've gone for it. If that kid came out and said, man, I want to go to Georgia, and Georgia was like, no, thanks, we're good, for whatever reasons they might want, I also would understand it. I think the thing that this young man will have to understand is that he's got strike one against him. So as he goes to Texas, I think there will be, if he goes to Texas, I mean, we should mention that the initial thought for him coming out was that he would return home to the state of Florida, and Miami and Florida State were two of the programs initially and instantly connected to him. Texas is getting the first shot and the only shot that we know of right now in terms of visits that are scheduled. So it doesn't mean that it's a slam dunk that he ends up at Texas, but when portal guys start taking visits, we've talked about this a lot lately, you know, there's a time frame. They want to have things done usually within 2 weeks of their names entering the portal. So I don't know. Texas is 50-50. I don't even know who the other 50 is.
He took a visit a few days after going into the portal.
Yeah.
I mean, so, like he didn't wait a couple of weeks. It was like portal on like Monday with Texas by Thursday night or something crazy like that.
So Texas is clearly a major new component of what he might do. It's not an absolute slam dunk, but I sit here and I guess I'll say I'll keep an open mind and we'll wait and see what happens. And that this would be for Texas to take Agiye Hall, it would be, I think, Sarkisian betting that, you know, guys, all that culture stuff, us and the players, and this is me betting that we've got it in place, that this will be the right place for a young man that's looking for the right place. I think the one thing we can say for Agiye Hall is that not every place probably is perfect for him. Alabama wasn't perfect for him. Whereas Xavier Worthy goes to Alabama, maybe he doesn't put up a dozen touchdowns as a freshman, but I have no doubts that that kid would adjust and fit in perfectly fine. I think Agiye Hall has, at least in his short term as a college player, has proven he needs a place that's better for him and not, and you know, again, I think that's one of the things they've got to decide this weekend. They have to ask him some questions. He has to have good answers to those questions. And if he does, definitely the type of talent you would take a gamble on. But we'd be, and again, I think you have to acknowledge all of the elephants in the room. And to me, there are two elephants in this room. He's super talented. That is an incredible elephant. There's a big old elephant in the room with a trunk, and it's like, that elephant is like, this dude can play on Sundays potentially. And I think the other elephant in the room is, it didn't end well at his last location. Those are the two things you got to merge together and try to figure out which one is more important than the other. I think, certainly based on the fact that they're bringing him in, that the talent is a siren and big red light blinking. Take him because he can make your football program better, potentially at a high level. And like you said, this is a sport where choir boys don't always win at all. You've probably talked me in more than I've talked you in. So like if this were—
There's a third elephant in the room, which is his age too.
I think that's a tiny elephant compared to the other elephants. But like, I think we'll see what happens. Look, the bottom line is an elite talent is visiting Austin this weekend in the portal. And it's a big deal. Like, this is a football program that a year ago didn't utilize the portal well enough. You wouldn't say that this year. Quinn Ewers, potentially starter at quarterback. Ryan Watts, day one starter, essentially at cornerback. Isaiah Nayor competing for a starting position. You know what I mean? Like, this isn't, no offense to Ben Davis or Ray Thornton or any of these other guys. These are really exemplary talents that I think elevate the program from a talent standpoint. I think this kid absolutely elevates the program. And maybe when you're 5-7, maybe that just stands out above all else. And I certainly understand the case if someone says it does. We don't want to be 5-7 anymore. We want to play for championships. If we take a risk and it doesn't work and we go 5-7 again, ain't nobody even going to be focused on the risk that didn't work out. It's just going to be the one loss record. And that is the bottom line.
It is. At the end of the day, that's the last thing I'll say. Like, at the end of the day, it's a bottom line sport. Steve Sarkisian is getting paid, $6 million or whatever that, that total is to win. It didn't happen in the year one. Texas fans want to win. And, one thing I always said about Tom Herman, I said Tom Herman was not hired to make Texas fans feel better about losing. He was hired to win. And Steve Sarkisian is here to win. And at the end of the day, if it's not quote unquote perfect and it doesn't look perfect, but you get the job done, ain't nobody gonna care about that. So it's all good. Agiye, go do your thing. Get fresh start always helps, and you'll see what we'll see what happens. We'll see what will happen. I think we'll know. Catch, he came in on a Thursday night. I think we'll know. It'll be in through Sunday. I think we'll know fairly quickly. With this one. And I don't think it's going to take that long.
He's the most all gas, no brakes prospect the Longhorns have probably ever approached. And as far as I know, all gas, no brakes is still the official slogan or the unofficial team slogan of the Texas football program under Steve Sarkisian. So there you have it. It's all gas, no brakes. Leave your comments in the comments section. Did either of us make a more compelling case than the other? Again, I don't even know that I have a case. I just was like, hey, just FYI, this backdrop exists. If it were me and my culture's good, I take the kid, don't even think about it. I think it may come down to, from a personal opinion standpoint, how big is culture and how big is talent in this yin-yang relationship. I'd love to read your comments about where the yin and the yang fit in together in situations like this. Like the video, it helps our algorithms. I don't know how, I don't understand it, but it helps with the YouTube stuff and where they slot videos. So do us a favor, push that little thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. Hey, we're going to have breakdown on this visit and how it went this weekend. Through the weekend, if he commits, you better believe we will have an instant analysis video right away. I'm guessing on Monday, there will be some discussion about him as well. Agiye Hall, get to know the name. It's a big deal this weekend on the 40 acres. For Anwar Richardson and myself, Jeff Ketchum, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon. Later.